Uh, Hello, everyone. I am Sharifuddin Ahmed Rana, and I'm actually the president of World Talent Economic Forums. I'm from Malaysia, and today our guest, Mr. Rob Inderlees. Nice to meet you. Uh,
Same.
yes, thank you. First, I just want to know about your present situation in USA and California in COVID-19. So what's the initiative you are taking that impact?
Well, I'm actually in Bend, Oregon, so the state north of California. Used to be in California, but I moved in 2014. In Oregon, we're in reasonably good shape. The amount of penetration of the virus has been low in my city. Currently, we have 5 or 6 people that have been tested positive that are active. Almost everybody else has been tested positive, has passed through the virus and been cured. In the county, I think we're around 65 people total, but of those
Mhm.
65, 40 have been through the process and are now out of the hospital and cured. Um, Deaths have been single digits, and the state's been relatively low as well. We've been one of the fortunate states that, because of the nature of the business outside of Portland, which had a lot of issues, most of the rest of the state is rural, and so a lot of distance naturally between the citizens of the state.
Okay, okay. So basically, what do you think about this COVID-19 situations? And as you are tech expert and tech consultants, so how actually like tech can play a role in that situations?
Sorry, ask the question again.
My question is that as you are tech expert, technology expert, in
Right.
that present situation, how technology can playing an important roles in that situations?
Well, the way technology has been mobilized to address this pandemic is one to free the data. Like a lot of areas, the information surrounding patient records is protected by law, and that means it's
Mhm,
not widely shared easily. And so, a
mhm,
lot of the efforts right now is are
mhm.
focused on connecting the
Efficacy has
various
been relatively
databases
low as well.
and data elements so
How
that they
technology can play an important
can talk to
role
each other, and so that
in
you
that
can do better
situations.
tracking and tracing.
Well, wait, Mhm. Okay, okay. So I just want to know, like example in present situations, what do things like what will happen this years about the business, especially the technology business, and what will be the situations?
Well, certain areas of the business are getting increased focus. The data management, focus on research and development, a lot of effort to spin up supercomputers to look at the various virus elements, and that's all beneficial. And of course, as we shifted workers to home, um, PC sales skyrocketed because we didn't have a lot of employees didn't have laptops for home, and now suddenly they needed to get to work. And of course, we had kids trying to study from home, and they didn't have Chromebooks or laptops, and so a lot of those sales actually spiked. But we've gone through most of that now, and and we're really now dealing with the fact of, okay, should the workers be at home? Should they be back in the company? And how do you maintain productivity when you've got that
Yeah.
uh, concern about whether people should be in the office or not in the office, and whether or not they're getting the proper visibility, and whether you can pull teams together. So a lot of that's happening at this very moment. The biggest concern, though, is that, as most people suspect, we've had the first wave of the virus. The second wave, if this follows the 1918 model of the flu
Mhm.
pandemic, the second wave is going to be a lot worse. And now a lot of work's going into, okay, now what do we do? Do we send people back home again that are at work, or do we just leave them at home and they never
Mhm.
come to work to begin with? And then what kinds of things do we need to do for the workers? PPE? Do we need to have protective gear on hand and ready? And a lot of the companies are now spinning that back up, so that
Mhm.
workers can be protected and they don't necessarily have to shut down plants again. So the
Mhm.
hope is that we're going to have enough protection in place that we don't have to shut down production. Much of the manufacturing, though, is being
Mhm.
done in Asia these days, though, and that's a lot of that's kind of
Mhm.
outside or out of the hands, because it's being done by subs, out of the
Mhm.
hands of the major companies. So concerned that we're going to get a hit again when the second wave hits, but a lot of effort going in to mitigate that impact.
Okay, like in present situations from Asia, we observing that unemployment is the biggest issues after the lockdown and the shutdown. So, what do you think? What's the solution actually, and what will be the future of huge amount of people?
Well, that's it. The fact is we have to figure out a way to safely work together again, and that may mean improvements in personal protection gear, getting around a lot of the personal concerns surrounding using that protection gear. We've got groups here in the United States that are refusing to wear masks and are refusing to social distance because they see that as a violation of their freedoms. That's problematic because those are the areas where we're seeing the greatest spread of the virus right now, and if we can't rein those groups in, we're going to have serious problems with regard to sickness and death as that second wave hits. Granted, we're sitting now, we went from the lowest unemployment in history to the highest unemployment in history. And economically, that's having a huge impact on a lot of businesses. The failure rate in businesses is very high. And a number of people are now projecting that we're going to have very high rates of suicides as well in the coming weeks and months. And we're still going to have to get through all of that. Spinning up against some of that stuff are efforts to better monitor people's attitudes and feelings so that the suicide wave can be avoided or at least mitigated. And a lot of the app developers are now focused on creating apps that would help with those kinds of events, keep making people feel like they're more connected, less desperate, and perhaps more likely or less likely to commit suicide or attempt suicide. So a lot of that's being factored into the development efforts at this moment.
Okay, great. Like this is most important thing as you working with a lot of global company. What will be the impact of the globalizations? Actually, what do you think? Like when we go for shutdown everything, so how it will work? Like our aeroplanes and everything closed down. So
Well, suddenly there's a resurgence in doing things like we're doing here right now, virtual events, so people don't have to get on planes and run the risk of getting sick. So a big push in that, and a lot of advancement suddenly going into video conferencing tools. So this can become much more useful. If you've been watching the Microsoft Build event, which is going on this week, they're using professional quality studios to present the event in what is probably one of the highest quality events of its type, and probably an indicator of the events that are going to come. So keeping people off planes, doing tracking and tracing with regard to employees. So if you do have a surge of illnesses, you can identify what the source is and quarantine the sources. So you don't have to shut down the entire plant. You can just quarantine the people that are ill or the people that have become sick. And then of course, that big effort to diversify logistics chains so that you're not dependent on any one country. There was a huge mistake in putting so much of the manufacturing in China that we saw when China went dark. Suddenly you couldn't get parts. So even though other parts of the world might be up with regard to manufacturing, they couldn't get parts. If you can't get parts, you can't build anything. And so those plants, even before COVID hit their areas, had to be shut down. And of course, that hurts with unemployment and the rest of it. So a lot of diversification now of the supply chain so that you can better weather an event like this. You can go to backup factories or backup facilities if one particular area is hit particularly hard.
yes, you just give me an example about the China. So whole world, even I'm from Malaysia, we have a strong dependency on China, especially on manufacturing and many
Right.
more things. So what will be the next era, global politics and the business relationship in between China and USA, and what do you think?
Well, we're clearly the USA is looking at other geographies for manufacturing, including domestic. A lot of the medical equipment manufacturing is going to be shifted back to the United States so we can control it, because that was one of the big problems with this pandemic is we couldn't get ventilators. The companies that were building ventilators were also in China, and you couldn't get them because those factories were shut down. Of course, China allegedly delayed the release of some of the more damning information so that they could acquire a lot of the spare resources in terms of PPE and ventilators. And so that resulted in a huge shortage and a lack of trust between the countries. So a lot of effort to bring at least critical manufacturing back domestically so that we can control it here in case this kind of thing happens again. Also, but we're looking at other geographies like Mexico, Taiwan. I'm sure we're looking at Malaysia as other areas where we can do manufacturing so that once again it's diversified and we're not that dependent on China.
Yes, we understand. So, like in present situations, we think that vaccine can solve these present situations. And what do you think? What do you think about vaccine? What's the situation of USA and research area about this vaccine?
Well, so there's a lot of hope that there's going to be a vaccine by December. A
Mhm.
number of sites, as I say, we've spun up the largest supercomputers in the world to work on this very problem. And those supercomputers are looking for mostly medications that can mitigate the virus, but they're also working on helping with regard to the vaccine. And we've now had at least one company gone into second stage trials on a vaccine that looks promising, which looks like at least there's a probability, a reasonable probability we might have a vaccine in December. Against that, though, and certainly what we learned from the flu is these viruses tend to mutate, and and as we've seen in past few flu events, if the vaccine doesn't match the mutation, it's largely ineffective. And so now the concern is if it's like the flu, we'll have mutations, and the vaccine we develop may not be the right one for the version of COVID-19 that's spreading at that particular point in time. So that kind of offsets this, but we're gaining the capability of being able to pivot very quickly on vaccines. Historically, a vaccine has taken up somewhere between 2.5 and 4 years to develop. Trying to develop something in 12 to 18 months is unprecedented, but it looks like we're going to be able to do it, which is going to shorten dramatically the time that it takes to develop a vaccine against a mutated virus. So by the time this is over, we should be able to handle these events far better than we are today. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of people are going to lose their lives in the process, but at least long term, we should be able to get our arms around this kind of an event and avoid it happening, at least for this kind of a virus again.
Yes, it's very interesting. So basically, I just want to know, like, it's not only USA and Europe or China. Basically, there are a lot more country already affected. What do you think that the system of vaccine supply chain management, how the developing nations from South Asia, from Asia, they will get this vaccine? How effectively it will work? What's your idea? You are consultant as well.
Well,
So
yeah,
so.
it's right now it looks pretty grim because the developed nations are probably going to chew up all the supply, and so if you move to the developing nations, their ability to get supply is probably going to be predicated on their ability to manufacture it themselves and how well the vaccine technology or widely the vaccine technology is spread. Some countries are aggressively trying to spy on other countries' efforts in this regard. We've caught here in the United States several efforts to try to penetrate our labs and try to steal the information to make sure that those other countries get it. It's my opinion that vaccine technology should be widely spread and made available to everybody, and then the government that governments should fund those efforts because we're kind of all in this together. If any one nation doesn't get the vaccine, they'll become spreaders, and as long as people are mobile, they'll bring the disease back into the country. And of course, while that vaccine is active, it has a higher probability of mutating, and so it makes us all less safe. But we're not on that path right now. Right now, the path we're on is the developed nations will probably get the first set of vaccines, and the developing
Mhm.
nations will be left trying to find whatever little supply is left. And I don't think that's tenable.
Yes, this is one of the things we just want to know from you. Like, actually, USA is perhaps one of the biggest countries with economic power, best healthcare systems. They have a very good amount of investment in their healthcare. So,
Yeah.
this present situation actually happening? What's the reason behind that? Is there any scientific issues or anything? What your
Well, actually, when you say we've got the best healthcare system, I think we're ranked something like 34th, 35th last time I saw the ranking, and we're first in terms of how much we spend for it. So we spend an awful lot on healthcare, largely as a result of litigation inefficiency. We've got a lot of inefficiency in the system with regard to data sharing, and litigation is fairly active here. So if a doctor makes a mistake, the awards can be very high, and that runs up the cost of healthcare rather dramatically. So we're not really in great shape here. We've got a lot of money being spent on healthcare, but it's not being spent efficiently. And the end result is we're relatively dysfunctional with regard to responding to a virus like this. And that's being showcased. The current administration is not known for its efficiency either. Far better at trying to put blame on others than trying to, solve the problem itself. It's mismanagement at scale. A lot of other countries are experiencing this as well. I think we're seeing in many countries that the leadership just really isn't up to a catastrophe like this. And my hope is that in a lot of countries, we're going to relook at how we elect officials, so we get a higher quality of leader, at least better management in the future, so it doesn't have to be as devastating as this was. A lot of the problems we had here were avoidable if we'd gotten on top of this much more quickly than we did. But that's all, water underneath the dam. Now we've got to look at the next event and make sure that we're prepared for it, because we've clearly been warned with this one.
Yes. Another important thing is that, like, because you for our show, there are a lot of people watching you from Asia. So basically, I just want to know, like, what the Asian people, those who go for as an immigrant or as a student or as a job holder, do you have idea what the situation they are now facing? What their conditions?
Well, getting into the country right now is very tough. We have an administration that is anti-immigration. At this particular moment, so they really didn't want immigrants to begin with unless they were well educated and would bring forth a number of assets. So it was a very selective immigration program, much more selective than in prior administrations. And that's the world we live in. And then with the virus, a lot of immigration was largely shut down to keep infected individuals from coming into the country. Of course, it's already here. So it's a little bit like closing the barn door after the cows have escaped. So I'm not sure it's all that efficient, but at least we're testing in airports much more than we were before. And the preventative measures are stronger than they were at the beginning of this particular event. It just, I think it's some of the, well, I don't agree with a number of the positions from the administration, but the reality is it's much harder to get into this country right now than it should be. And some of the reasons are legitimate and some are not.
Understand. There's another factor regarding the unemployment issues as well as for entrepreneurship. There are a lot of startup around the world, especially tech entrepreneur. They're developing many business. So what's the condition and situation in USA regarding this tech startups and these things? Or for Asia, do you have any advice, especially for startup and these things?
Well, because the pandemic's consuming an awful lot of the free money, the funding for startups is a lot more limited right now than it was. There just isn't a lot of funds. When the stock market collapsed, that took a lot of the free cash with it. And so the end result is there just isn't a ton of funding for startups, unless those startups are focused on things like preventing some of the elements surrounding COVID-19. The money is flowing to startups that are doing things like tracking and tracing, antiviral research, or coming up with creative ways to develop PPEs. I just saw a proposal last week for a personal PPE suit that employees could wear to go to work and be safe, arguably safer than medical people are right now, because it's current generation and substantially more advanced than I'm seeing hospitals deploy. Those people seem to be getting funding. But outside of that, it's much more difficult at the moment because the entire nation seems to be focused on this disease, and it's very hard for investors now to look at much of anything else. And that's undoubtedly going to be true of Asia for a while as well. It's the money's going to go towards where the demand seems to be, and the demand seems to be focused on trying to come up with things or ways to mitigate this particular virus, be it video conferencing apps, collaboration apps, things that keep people working from home, all the way to advancements in tracking and tracing, and advancements in personal protection gear.
Okay, great. Like example, you are a consultant. As we know, you are a very good consultant. So let's say I want to give you a case study. Like you come to Asia and you find that few of the startups, they are actually struggling with their previous models. Like in that situation, what will be your advice, especially Asian startups, and for next 2-3 years? What they can do for better futures or for their survival? What your suggestions, like what your analysis?
Well, so first you've got to look at things that are emerging at this particular point in time, and not at legacy businesses. In other words, look at the problems that are coming because of this virus event. Clearly, some technologies like 3D printing, virtual reality, in fact, any of the mixed reality technologies, those things are probably going to go pretty well right now because they solve a critical problem in the industry that remains largely unsolved or effectively unsolved at the fringes. So those are areas that you would expect to see easy funding. Also, things like cost reduction. Companies are going to be aggressively looking at cutting costs, be it with regard to employees. So robotics remains incredibly hot. And because this thing's creating a lot of concerns between countries, eventually you figure military spending is going to come up, but largely surrounding artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, those things that have become very, very obviously behind the times at this particular point. In this instance, the cybersecurity area is getting a lot of interest all of a sudden because the cyber attacks have gone up so sharply. So those are areas that seem to be gaining a lot of interest at the moment. A new consumer hardware, it's going to be tougher unless it's something that is, has an AI back end and can make people feel more comfortable. That's going to be hard. But things like virtual pets could be used to address the concerns with regard to suicide and loneliness when people are isolated at homes. So just think through the application of the technology and imagine the world we're going to be in for the next couple of years. And there are clear gaps, and that's probably where your development effort should be focused. And if you're in an area that's having trouble getting funding right now, it's unless you see something in the future whether that's going to change, it's probably a dead end at this moment. In general, we look at 5-year cycles. So if something's looking bad now, it may not come back for 5 years. And small companies can't survive that kind of a gap. Brick and mortar retail, that's a tough business to be in right now. But if you can automate brick and mortar retail, so you can use cameras, robots, or automation to cut down on the number of workers, particularly in areas like food, where the exposure is extreme right now, you might find a willing audience and an open market. So there are places in legacy businesses where you can drop in automation now, where you probably wouldn't even get calls returned before. Where now these guys are hungry for any kind of a solution that allows them to open their doors safely again.
Yes, yes, this is very good advice. Even few of our viewers, they are giving you thanks for your great advice. Side by side, I just want to know more because this is some critical area. Like Asia, if you focus on South Asia and other part, you find that there are huge amount of peoples. So if we introduce artificial intelligence, if we introduce VRs, 3D printings, you do not think that these people, huge amount of people, they will lose their job, or how this kind of country will adapt these things? I just want to give you an example. Like once upon a times, as I am researchers and I have to do a lot of feasibility study and these things, I visit one of the city in South Asia and I try to develop waste to energy systems. So when I start research and doing this feasibility study, I find if we implement this kind of waste to energy related projects, maybe 3,000 of the people and the family, they will be unemployed. So it's very politically very difficult. So in that situation, how the huge amount of people and the governments, they will adapt with this kind of technology in the present situations?
Well, remember, a lot of this technology will still need to be serviced, installed, developed, replaced. Those jobs right now are in short supply. And if you look at some of the advanced technology areas like quantum technology, where we've got huge shortages, and I just saw a projection that indicated in healthcare, we're going to have here in the United States, we're going to have shortages in the hundreds of thousands of workers in just a few years. So that there are huge impending shortages where some of these people could be retrained and may find themselves. But just recognize that in areas of high density, where factories where you've got lots of people on the line, those are areas where a virus is going to cut through it like a hot knife through butter, and then the factory has to shut down. Or in foods, where food servers could spread the virus to customers. Once again, areas that are likely to be quickly shut down in the case of these returning viruses, and that's where a solution has to be put in place to either keep those workers more safe the way they are, or to automate them so the factories that can keep on running. Because the factory goes down, you're out of your job regardless. And so the effort to keep the factories up and running is going to be paramount. And the question about whether it's done with human workers or with robotic workers will be based on whether or not we can protect those human workers effectively. And right now, we don't have a good way to do that, and that's pushing us towards automation at a very high rate. There are things that we could do to better protect those workers. And IBM, of course, is promoting an idea that what you do is you use automation to enhance the workers so workers don't have to work so closely together. One worker can do the work of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people, and that then allows you to do things that would allow you to automatically socially distance, retaining a certain percentage of the workforce, but making them far more capable and far safer because they're more physically removed from their peers. But the reality here is we don't have control over this virus yet, and we may never. And the expectation is because of global warming, we're going to have more of these virus events because it's causing these things to mutate and jump species. So the result is we have to make our countries and our industries far more resilient to this kind of a thing, because none of us want to go through this again, whether it's losing loved ones or being laid off or just having a concern about whether or not you have a job anymore. This is something nobody wants to go through twice. This should be a once in a lifetime event.
Like World Talent Economic Forum, we build up this economic forum. Our target is that we want to develop at least 1 million people next 3 years. Like what you are talking about, the technology, the AI, the 3D printings, this kind of things. Like when we create these kind of visions, actually, as you are intellectual, you have experience to doing work with IBMs, you work with many big organizations, and you have the understanding about the ecosystem of Silicon Valleys and these things. What will be your advice? How we can do more effective job for people? How we can train these people?
Well, you can certainly see the efforts by companies like Cisco, IBM, Dell. Each of these companies had major, and Microsoft was just talking about their major training programs, free training programs, so people can go and get retrained to fill clear openings that they and their ecosystem have now. We have huge still, I mean, even with the shutdowns, we still have huge shortages in certain skill sets that are keeping the development of new technologies from coming to market timely. And diversity is a huge problem. The entire industry has recognized that because of a lack of particularly women in the workforce, so the products are poorly targeted and not as well developed as they might be. And so there's a massive effort to train women and get them into the workforce to fill some of these open spots. So that the technology companies to a large extent are stepping up with providing free training, help and assistance. IBM has a program to bring people that have been in the workforce that had to leave to raise children back in to fill critical jobs because they have the education. Their experience was there's a gap in their experience, and training can fill that gap. And so a huge effort for retraining and finding new and creative ways so that somebody in a particular job that might be at risk can do the training at night and on their own time. And so when they're ready to make a job change from a job that might be a risk for automation to a job that's now opening up because of automation, they're able to do it. But for a lot of these folks, doing the old that I'm going to have the same job my entire life thing probably is no longer viable. The environment is changing so rapidly, you do need to find and keep in mind what your plan B is, what your next step is going to be, and it may be in a different industry and maybe in a completely different job. But I've changed jobs in my career 7, 8 times, and really kind of keeps things vibrant. And suddenly you find, particularly for a lot of folks who are in jobs they really don't like or don't enjoy, you can eventually find something like I did that it's like you're working, but it's like you're on vacation all the time. It's because I just enjoy doing this so much. So the end result is I think if people maintain flexibility and keep their eyes open, then they can shift to where the market's going, because it's pretty obvious what kinds of stuff we need. And it's not like the technology vendors are being quiet about the kinds of jobs they need people to fill.
Yes. One interesting thing as academician, I just want to share with you. In 2013, I arranged a academic training program for 7 days, and we invite many intellectuals around the world, and we try to train around 300 people, 300 students as a model basis. So when we start our program, first thing first, we find language is a big issue. Like, fact is that like the trainer from USA, they're trying to transfer some things, but the student cannot adapt with these things. So in that, like, this is a case study for you. like IBM doing a lot of online training, Microsoft doing, or Cisco, they are providing a lot of these things. How you integrate it? Because this is real time example I'm trying to giving you. So how we integrated this kind of training with the local huge amount of people in specifically in Asia.
Well, it really depends on the program. Some are using local trainers, people that
Mhm.
speak the language and can interact with the students. Others are using technology like real-time translation to better communicate. But once again, because we're having to do much more of this, much more widely, there now is a huge effort to improve the tools that surround online training because we're having to use it much more aggressively. When schools are shut down, the option of having people go into class, at least near
Mhm.
term, is no longer an option. And so the amount of effort that's going into improving these tools is unprecedented. I mean, just looking at tools like Microsoft 365, the amount of change that's gone through in the last year exceeds what I've seen that company do in the last decade. So there's just a huge amount of focus on improving the tools. And so I'm just saying things are going to get better pretty quickly because we now have a critical need across the ecosystem to train people from various geographies and get them up to speed and fill the critical need for workers in areas that we didn't even know we were going to have 6 months or a year ago. So I think you're going to see improvement, but it's a very real problem. As you point out with
Mhm.
the startups, it would be, if I was doing a startup, it would probably be where I'd want to focus because I think this is going to be a need that's not going to go away. The ability to be able to better train people and really take what we've learned about psychology, technology, and artificial intelligence and put that into a program that could be far
Mhm.
more effective than what we currently have. Because most of the programs we have right now are still based on thoughts and processes that existed back when I was in school. And as you can tell, I'm no young chicken. So the spring chicken. The end result is I think we're going to see a lot of our improvement here. It just isn't all here yet.
Mhm. Okay, very interesting. Actually, I think we are feeling more interest. That's why asking too much of questions. Very interesting. So let's say we are working with a group of companies, those who have universities, hospitals, and energy business and construction business and many more things. And in present conditions, to enhance their capacity, like example, if they want to improve their business conditions, what will be your suggestion? Because I know from Asia already many of the companies, they are communicating with me that we are losing our business, how many days it will be continue, what's the situations, how we can adapt with the technology, we do not have adaptation with technology, many more questions actually. So what's your idea, what's your thoughts in that
Well,
situation?
so one of the ways to deal with lots of concerns is focus people on solutions. In other words, and I'm not talking about going out and just picking products because we're not at that stage yet. What we've got to do is you've got a lot of people that are very concerned. Put them to work trying to find solutions. I mean, you've got your employees sitting at home. They don't have a lot. I mean, a lot of them don't have a lot to do. They're concerned about losing their jobs. So
Mhm.
they're all- the these this is brain power. The A lot of them may have ideas how to make things more efficient, ideas on how to implement their job remotely, ideas on how to how to how to make a difference, and collect those ideas. And the very fact of just having people thinking about ways to solve problems out of the box, it takes their mind off dealing with the problem and can improve their morale and their overall attitude. And you can actually come up with better ideas. But at the very baseline, what you got to do is really analyze the problem. Excuse me, analyze the problem from your perspective. This is not something where you call in a vendor and say, "Help me yet." You sit down and say, "Okay, what is the industry moving? In which case, we need to think about another industry to move into. Is it something that's transitory? Will it come back? In which case, you just need to figure out how to survive through the interim." And then, by the way, what do you need to do to make sure that you don't have to send employees back home again? What kind of protective methods could you implement that could make your environment much safer? These are the things you should be thinking about now. You get away from the doom and gloom and start thinking about problem solving, start thinking about the way you would like the world to be for you tomorrow and start working towards that end. At the very least, it improves morale and gets people focused on solutions as opposed to doing the oh me thing, we're in trouble and the whole world's going to end. And you may not find it, but at least it improves your attitude. And if you don't look for something, you're never going to find it. So there's a much better chance you'll find a unique way out of the problem if you leverage the brain power you have in the company, open the doors and listen to your employees and have them help develop a solution, be that going into another industry or just approaching your industry very differently in this new time. But sitting at home and complaining about it, that's not going to get anything done. Everybody's got to start thinking about stepping up. And it may very well be that part of your problem is the government, and maybe that means you have to, raise up a group that's more able in dealing with the government and helping the government come up with a better solution. I think the time of companies kind of leaving governments alone or just focusing on candidates are over, because we've certainly seen here when a government fails to act, the pain can be incredibly painful. I know a lot of your regions out there are having similar problems with your governments, and some of these big companies, they can be kingmakers, and maybe it's time to kind of focus on maybe getting people that are competent in office as opposed to people that are popular in office.
Yes. From specifically Asia and South Asia, from my personal experience, I saw many of the small companies, they become big without the help of government. But now is the situations like they have to taking the help of the government. What do you think in that situation? Strategically, government will take more control over this kind of corporations, or what will be the like corporate world strategy?
Well, you made a good point. You need to think strategically. Often when you're short of money, you're thinking tactically. So we need to get the money right now. We'll worry about the future later, and then that future comes back to bite you in the hindquarters. So you want to sit down and think about this strategically. You're going to take money now, but is it going to create a big problem for you later on, where your survival could be questioned? Because governments aren't particularly good at running companies. In fact, historically, they're very bad at it. And so you might, put off this one crisis only to find yourself in another one. So I would certainly seek out help from peers, other companies that have been through this. I'll find out what they did to mitigate the long-term damage from the government. And if there's no way to mitigate the damage, maybe look at alternative forms of funding. There are funding sources out there if you search for them and you're in a viable business, and they might be better in terms of maintaining control of the company post this event. But this is something you do want to approach strategically. Think through the series of events, seek help from other people that have been through similar problems in the past, and then generate a strategy that fits your industry, fits your business, and fits your specific conditions, that is not good for just for today, but is good for you in the future as well.
Okay, very good. As it is the strategic times, like example, many of the organizations, they have to think strategically, but we have lack of even strategic people. This is the problem. Even many of the organizations I know. So how, as a mentors, you can contribute for this kind of things, or is it everything will be remotely, or what do you think? What's the opportunity we can grow in between Asia and USA for this strategic alignment and partnerships and corporate relationships and these things?
Well, at the core of the problem you just articulated is we have a lack of strategic thinkers in business, and it's getting worse, particularly in the executive ranks. And that's because there's been so much focus on quarterly results. And so there are huge sacrifices, layoffs, just really bad decisions like selling your plant and then leasing it back, which look brilliant tactically, but strategically put you in an economic problem over the long term. And of course, allowing executives to advance that are tactical thinkers are all problematic. We were in a war. We would have all lost miserably by this particular point. So you really need to promote strategic thinking long term, making sure that people have thought the then what follow on. We're going to do this. Okay, then what? Okay, then we're going to do that. Well, then what? And particularly think about responses. So if we do one thing, what's the competitor going to do? And then what are we going to do after that? This is more of a game of chess or even Go than it is of checkers or blackjack, which are more tactical games. So the end result is, because of that lack of strategic thinking, a lot of companies just don't have the capability right now of being able to formulate a long-term strategic plan, and that's going to hurt them a lot. Those companies that have developed strategic thinking or have executives that think strategically will undoubtedly come up a lot better, because they're already thinking about what they're going to do in 2 years, and they're making sure that what they're doing today isn't going to damage that particular future, and that's important. Now, granted, you have to get through today to get to that future, so you want to trade too much off on the future, because I've seen that mistake as well. So you give up the tactical too much, and then you lose out because you don't take care of today's business. But you want to have balance. And right now, everybody's way too tactical. I need to be thinking strategically. In fact, right now, we should be working very aggressively at what we're going to be doing when that second pandemic wave hits. And for the most part, we're focused on just trying to get things open again. And we're not really thinking about, okay, we need to open this smart, so when that wave hits, we don't have to shut down again. And that's really an unfortunate omission at this point.
Okay, very good strategy actually. So basically, like what your suggestion? Like the big companies, like now they are in problem, they are in trouble. What will be? How many years it will be continue from taking like if they want to overcome from these situations, or like how they make their strategy for next few years, or what do you think? What do you think of that from your use experience actually?
No, my experience is that most of these companies are going to fail.
Okay.
Historically, that's what's happened. I mean, it's almost I've been in the midst of this for most of my life, and the reality is most of these companies are going to fail. I mean, if you look back, and it's easy to say, look back 100 years and took a list of companies and how many of them are still around today, and then look back 50 years and how many companies are still around, and then 25 years, how many companies are still around today. We go through a lot of company churn over just a few decades, and often it is an event like this that takes out a lot of companies all at once because they weren't able to think around the particular event. So here's a case where really your strategic thinkers are critical, and you really do need to be bringing your employees on board and using that brain power right now to think about how you're going to make sure that you survive this event and the events that follow. Because as I said, this is just one of many events that we're going to be experiencing over the next few years. We're not even talking about global warming at the moment. It's another event that's driving huge changes in the world, and undoubtedly going to turn certain regions into uninhabitable regions. We're seeing that right now in parts of South and Central America. It really is important to develop your company, develop a culture of survival. Thomas Watson Jr. himself said this a long time ago in building IBM, which is one of the few companies that's been around for 100 years. Is that you have to be willing to change everything but who you are. In other words, keep your core principles in place, but be willing to change your business, your focus, whatever needs to survive and to flourish, and not stay locked into whatever it was that initially created you. Because a lot of times markets change, customers change, and if you don't change with them, you're left off in a dead end someplace, and you're one of the vast majority of companies that fail. And unfortunately, with a COVID event, that failure rate goes up dramatically. Instead of happening over years or decades, it can happen over months. And we're certainly seeing the economic pressures a lot of these companies are pushing them under. A lot of our big retailers here in the United States right now are looking like they're going to have to go bankrupt or even out of business. And even some of the new companies like Uber are on death watch. So being able to figure out, when these things happen, in fact, you should have plans in place. You have crisis teams in place that have already worked out plans and what to do if some of these events happen. What happens if you have a global pandemic like we have now? What happens if we have a global war, which is likely when you have a pandemic and you've got food shortages? You can have major physical conflicts. So what's your plan? What are you going to do? What if one of your production sites is one of those areas and you can't get supply? Are you out of business? So what's your plan B? And the problem we're facing right now is a large number of companies, the vast majority, had no plan for a pandemic, and
Yes.
they were caught flat-footed, and this disaster became far worse than it needed to be as a result.
Yeah, this is very important actually. Large amount of company, even the government, nobody thinks it will impact in our life and it will go in that way. So it's really challenging. With your experience, with your age, what do you think that human civilization will survive? We can save this world. What your advice actually?
Well,
really hard.
I don't think we're at a race-ending event yet, but there are certainly concerns because there are inability to deal with this particular virus. I mean, think of it this way: this virus was not manufactured. There's some conspiracy theories that suggest it was, but this was not a manufactured virus. But what if we did? We have labs that are developing viruses all the time, weaponized viruses all the time. What if one of those has gotten loose? Those viruses are much more devastating, designed specifically to spread and wipe out an entire country or an entire race. So the fact that we know that kind of stuff is out there would indicate there are things we need to be doing to mitigate that kind of an event. And we know the dinosaurs, at least the prevailing theory, the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid, and we still don't have a good asteroid defense.
Yeah.
And you think, well, it wiped out what was here before us, maybe that ought to be a priority, but no, it isn't. And so I think this idea of strategic thinking long term is something that we need to adapt as a race and make sure that we have a way to survive some of these future race-ending events. This one's not going to end us. This one's actually making us stronger because we are now developing tools that will prevent or at least mitigate the next pandemic-like event. But we really need to more aggressively do this on a regular basis. We shouldn't have to wait for a pandemic to develop a pandemic defense. We should already have one packaged and ready to go, so we can respond much more effectively. I mean, in theory, with this event, as soon as the virus broke out in Wuhan, China, we should have been locking things down and keeping people from migrating, for one. But even in CES, our electronic conference that we have here in the United States in January, there were a bunch of people from Wuhan at the event, and there's every likelihood that I may have contracted the virus myself at that event, though we won't know until I'm tested because we don't have testing over here yet. But at least not in my region. But the fact that we didn't do that allowed this virus to spread far more quickly than it otherwise would have. And we certainly knew about the problem. We could have mitigated it. We just chose as a planet not to, and we've got to fix that behavior.
Yes, but this is actually very strange. This world has $1 billion company, $1 trillion company, many researcher, Ivy League university, many more things. But when this virus comes, this is actually horrible that we cannot like. Do you think this world do not have any preparation like any this kind of things? Even we hear that Bill Gates and this kind of scholar a few years before they're trying to suggest this world. What's going on this world? What's going on this corporate world?
It wasn't politically popular. I mean, you point out Bill Gates in 2012 and again in 2018 argued that we were going to have a pandemic and we were ill prepared for it. He even pointed out it was probably going to come out of the Wuhan, China region. That's where he thought it was going to emerge. So I said, and the irony is a lot of people now claim he helped create the virus to prove himself right or for population control. So they just goes, you come up, you tell people that something bad's going to happen and it happens. And instead people say, hey, you're right. They say, hey, you caused it. And that's the kind of problem we've got right now. The people that are warning about future viruses are often held up as pariahs, and instead of listening to them and then putting in place plans to mitigate what is clearly a coming event, we attack the people that are warning us, and that means that we don't get the warnings we need or react to them timely, and that's a political thing. And that goes back to my belief that companies probably should be more aggressively assuring that politicians are less like that and much more strategic thinkers, because we're all discovering our lives are in the hands of these politicians, our businesses are in the hands of these politicians. And if they are incompetent, we're pretty much screwed.
Oh, very interesting. Actually, especially your strategic part. This is actually, I think, very, very important suggestion for many countries around the world. So, okay, let's think in that way. So now we have to go for the different arena, different strategic point of views, especially in corporate worlds and governments and like different kind of startups and the whole economic systems. Like 3 or 5 points. Can you just give that this kind of things we need to focus for next few decades or next few years, like fast technology or in any specific, just key points, what you want to give them the advice? Because I'm sure there are many corporate people and the government people, they are watching you from here.
Well, at the very least, there need to be active crisis management groups. In other words, groups that are constantly looking at potential catastrophes, protection, threats not only against the race, which is very, but threats against businesses and industries, and that have active strategies and how to mitigate those threats, whether that be retraining the employees that are going to be impacted, be that making sure that the technology remains relevant in a future world, or making sure that if this event does occur, that there are plenty of whatever is needed to mitigate the event, be that medication, safety gear, trained first responders, and processes that can be put in place immediately to limit the impact or to respond to the event. And we should have an ongoing hierarchy that we all know about of potential catastrophes that we need to be aware of. I mean, and one of the things that we had years ago, at least when I was young, we had regular training for what were likely events. I mean, some of the training was pretty stupid. I still remember the sirens going off and hiding underneath my desk at school against a nuclear attack, which probably would have done no good whatsoever, but made it feel like you were doing something. But the fact is, years ago we had regular training on what to do in terms of when an event happened, and we should have regular training now, whether that comes from addressing a hostile person, like a shooter in a school, which we've got a number of instances here in the United States, or whether that is a disease that has suddenly broken out in the city. People should know what they should do, and we should be able to say, hey, this is the event. We know what we need to do. We're ready to do it, so we don't get the panic that otherwise occurs. And a lot of times what happens is when panic goes in, people are making decisions very rapidly. They're not thinking through them, and they can cause much more damage than otherwise would be the case because they just don't know what to do. They're running around like crazy. And so we need to develop a mentality and teams that are constantly going out and doing this and communicating out what needs to be done, and then training with regard to what we need to do about this. I mean, to give you one example that is very pertinent to me, we still don't do good training with regard to cybersecurity. Most people do not know that if you get an attachment from somebody you don't know, don't open it. And right now we've got a major event happening in the PC ecosystem where there is a particular Word file that's going around with active technology that if you enable the automation of the technology, it will infect your machine almost immediately. But it requires the user to both open the attachment and then agree to allow the scripts to run. And we should all be trained to never do that, because that's the way that a virus is injected into our machines. But we're not doing even that little amount regularly. Some companies are, but it's not universal. And so we really need to be training our population to deal with these likely events they're going to deal with. It. I mean, even little stuff like getting a criminal calling in and trying to cheat you out of money. It's just we should be doing that, particularly with our older folks, so they don't lose their retirement money to some particular scam. I mean, my father-in-law bought a Cadillac out of Canada. There was no Cadillac in Canada. It just cost him $20,000 because somebody convinced him he won an award. This kind of stuff shouldn't be happening. We should be actively making sure that individuals are trained to deal with whatever crisis they're likely to come up with, and we're just not doing that.
Yes, very interesting, very interesting. So this is the major issues actually. Many more people actually discussing around the world, but from our discussion we find now strategy is a major issue for the company, for the governments, and especially we have a crisis of good strategic peoples, those who can build up for company, those who can build up for government. So in that situations, like how many policymakers and these things, they can adapt these things, especially strategic point of view, because I find that from this interview your strategic analysis is the best part of this interview. Yes.
Well, I love strategies. It's the nature of the job, and it's what I enjoy. So looking off into the future is kind of what I do, and that's what is important. But as I say, the big difficulty here is if somebody, let's take Bill Gates, even Bill Gates, the richest guy in the world, at least for much of that time. I think he's second richest right now, but richest guy in the world, certainly incredibly charismatic, very believable, highly credible. He went out and he told people that, hey, we've got a virus coming, we need to plan for it. And pretty much everybody said, yeah, no, we don't really need to do that. You're a nice guy, but it's never going to happen. And of course, then it did, and now he's getting blamed for causing it. So for anybody else that's trying to do that kind of thing, it's okay. I mean, there's no upside. They're gonna call you a fraud until it hits, and then when it hits, they're gonna blame you for the event. That's worse. That's really one of the worst things you can do to somebody that's trying to warn you of a problem is to to blame them for the problem and criticize them for coming up with the idea. And in some cases, some of these folks. I mean, we had an incident here in the United States where during the Iraq War, people came up and said, there are no weapons of mass destruction. Those people, they lost their jobs. They were. I mean, they were telling the truth. It was, and that's the problem we've got right now. Is the very people that are strategic thinkers. If they share their strategic thoughts, they're often attacked as opposed to embraced, and then the plans never get developed. And so, in many cases, we're actually discouraging the behavior that we need to protect us from the next event, because we don't really like the bad news, and so instead of attacking the problem, we're attacking the messenger.
Okay, great. Basically, for World Talent Economic Forum, we are just building our community and these things. Hopefully, you will be our strategic advisor, and we will do a lot of work with you in Asia and with many corporations and governments, because I find that your strategy is very strong. And now, actually, I think this is the missing point. Many people actually missing in that way. If they think strategically and benefit, they think their organizational benefit and human development, and it will create a lot of impact. And actually, this is my last question. Especially, you are also a human resource department, and you have a lot of knowledge in that arena. What's your advice? Because 2/3 of the people, billions of people live in Asia Pacific area. So, what's your advice for this huge amount of peoples, like in that situations, for getting their economical sustainability?
Well, clearly the important thing is, I'll give you a bad example. Back in the 1970s, the United States discovered it had a diversity problem, so it put in place something called the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And the idea was to fix the problem of diversity. And so what they did is they put in quotas so that you were forced to hire a certain number of diverse folks, but they didn't look at the core problem, which is these people that weren't making it into colleges and universities, and so they weren't coming up with proper training. And so what they did is they took these folks and they put them in jobs they were untrained for, and those people did a very bad job. And so instead of helping the problem, they increased the stigma that these minorities couldn't do the job. And the reason they couldn't do the job wasn't because they were a minority; they couldn't do the job because they were never trained to do the job. And so by not focusing on the core of the problem, the cause of the problem, which is the lack of education, they didn't fix the problem, and we still have a huge diversity problem, particularly in technology today. So if you're dealing with the people, what you want to start with is analysis. What is causing the problem? Why are these people unable to find jobs? And in many cases, it may be because they're not getting good medical care, maybe because they can't afford good housing, they can't afford good food, and they're probably not getting good education. You have to focus on those things first. In fact, this is nothing new. Bill Gates has been saying this for decades. That you've got to focus on that stuff first, bring them up to a level where they have the right education, they can find the jobs, and then they will help build the industries for you. But if you don't fix that stuff underneath, you can't, try to incent companies to come in and build there, because they're going to have to bring more workers in from the outside, because your workers will not be trained to do the jobs. You have to start at the core of the problem, increase the capabilities of your people, and then use those capabilities to build an industry, not try to drive an industry in from the top, because that just won't work. You have to start from the bottom, and then you can drive in from the top, and you've got the people there to do it. It's really thinking this through and analyzing it, not trying for that quick hit. Oh, I want to get reelected, and if I bring these companies in, people are going to vote for me. But if the companies are coming in and they're either fully automated, which is often the case, or they're bringing in workers from the outside, that's not going to help your unemployment problem. In many cases, that's going to make it worse. And so you need the people to analyze the problem, develop a solution against that analysis, and then implement that solution. Those are the three phases, and often we forget the first two, and we move right to implementation, and that's why they mostly fail.
Yes, that is very great idea. So this is actually a very interesting session, especially in future. We have a plan. We will do Rob's strategy class. So hopefully then many corporations, governments, and the policymaker, and even young people, they will get a lot of your guideline, especially your strategic part. So thank you for coming these sessions, and hopefully we will work together. We will make a very strong ecosystems, and we will make more good strategy for this world, for this business world, for government, and we will set this world together. Thank you, and especially I want to give you thanks from core of my heart, and hopefully we will invite you in Asia after all of the things finish, and we will arrange conference together, and we make a very beautiful show together. Thank you for your beautiful advice, beautiful
My pleasure.
suggestions and guideline. Thank you, Mr. Rao.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
yes. Make a better world and make a strong ecosystem together. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my hope. A rising tide that raises all boats.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yes.